We've spoken on this channel over the past few months about Palestinian opposition and where it exists and where it doesn't. So we have Hamas ruling Gaza, we have the PLO, or Palestinian Authority, ruling Judea and Samaria in the West Bank of the Jordan River, and they have their differences on some things, and we talked about that. One of the things they absolutely have a complete consensus over is the desire and intention to exterminate the Jews. Another thing that's less of an issue that comes up or comes up less frequently is another point on which they have a consensus, which is that homosexuality is a sin, it's immoral, and of course should be illegal. And I'm not sure they deal with it in exactly the same way, but certainly they deal with it in a very different way from how it's dealt with in Israel. And now I know by the way, one of the ways it's dealt with in Israel is Palestinians get asylum in Israel, get refugee status if they're gay, because they will be probably executed, certainly in Gaza. Now, uh, so we've talked kind of jokingly about this gays for Palestine, LGBTQIA plus for Palestine, whatever you want to call it. And the idea, by the way, I don't think there's LGBTQ. I don't think they've heard of all the letters yet in actual Palestine. So homosexuality is illegal, but I don't know about different types of non-binary. Maybe that's okay, but. Yeah, I thought it would be a good opportunity after the Eurovision to talk about this and try to take it a bit more seriously, as difficult as that is. And I will give myself a few minutes to figure out how to take it seriously by going to the other panelists. I'm joined by Morgan, Marco, Richard. Welcome to the reality show, day 220 of the war in Israel. Marco.
Yeah, well, thank you very much. How do you keep a straight face, pun intended, when you talk about these idiots? Um, Honestly, turkeys for Christmas. That's the extent of the seriousness of the whole enterprise. The title of this episode, understanding this LGBT whatever for Palestine. Well, you cannot really understand it. It's just something which goes beyond the joke, because if you look at the essential, it is such a laughable even proposition. If somebody ever told you, we got some breach of human rights in the world, so what do? We choose the one who is the most um, guilty of breaching human rights, and we support them. Why would you want to praise the country that actually the only country in the Middle East where you're not going to get killed for it? I actually came across preparation for this thing, like an international UN-sponsored state of LGBT, whatever they are, rights across the world. And they're not actually shy and mentioning the fact that in every Muslim country where Sharia law prevails, i.e., every Muslim country, it's illegal at best, and the death penalty is on in few countries. I've got actually the list here. So death penalty is awarded to the gays in Brunei, Iran, Mauritania, Nigeria, Saudi Arabia, Yemen, continues Afghanistan, Pakistan, Qatar, Somalia, and the United Arab Emirates. Now, do I need to say more? Of course, Palestine, because Palestine is a former British controlled area. They still have the old British law, but because they're British laws from effectively the last century, they still warrant to the felony of knowing carnally another man or somebody of the same sex. It's imprisonment for at least 10 years. But we know but from the deeds of ISIS that usually you you meet a very sad end if you do those kind of, if you are a gay person in a Muslim country. So even though legislation looks much more much less brutal, the outcome is the same, really.
I think there's a bunch of stuff to unpick here. First of all, the whole LGBTIQ plus whatever, the fact that it's such a bunch of letters as if someone just sat on the keyboard, which makes it almost impossible to say when you're trying to say it at speed. But that group, which is an artificial group in the first place, it's always spoken about as if it's one community. It's not one community for a start. Even the individual letters aren't individual communities. They're just people who happen to share the same characteristic. And some of them, obviously the later letters, are of dubious relevance and existence anyway. And then the plus itself, when you've run out of the people's ability to retain information, or the crow, as objectivists would call it, and you can't retain any more letters, you just stick a plus on the end, so that everybody's accounted for. And effectively subsumed under that plus now is anyone who's oppressed, which now includes people in Palestine. That's how you achieve the link between it. And when you see a lot of these people talking about it, firstly, they're not the voice of the community, or such as it exists anyway. They're just the loudest voice. They don't speak for a whole. And secondly, they don't. Many don't understand what they're talking about. Many are simply taking the oppressed or the underdog as the key element of what they're flying a flag for, and it doesn't stack up when you look at it. But they go through all these sorts of contortions in order to evade or conceal the contradictions in their own arguments and what happens to gay people either in Gaza or in Arab countries generally, compared with in Israel. And that's what you see all the time. And that's some of what I'm sure we'll unpick during this show, as well as understanding why the two sides do it. Why does this group support Islam, essentially, which is what we're talking about? And why do Muslims within the protests in the UK or the US or wherever allow a group that they don't favour to march with them? And to what extent do they allow that? And for how long? I think that's something else we can examine.
Yeah, I just want to quickly thank Gazman here for posting on TRS what he posted right at the end of TDO in case we missed it. Just realized Razi reminds me of a young Eugene Levy. Thank you very much. I'll take that as a compliment. I like how Eugene Levy looks even when he's not young. So, and thank you, Jonathan Honig, for the super chat. Morgan.
I think people are rightly confused about the whole phenomena of queers for Palestine or LGBTQ plus for Palestine. Except when you're putting it into the context of the way people are approaching politics at the moment, it makes an awful kind of sense, in the sense that people are intensely tribalistic. They aren't, for the most part, thinking first-handedly about what their goals are, what the right kind of principles for leading a flourishing life are, and how do you substantiate those in a society. They're thinking, well, I've aligned myself with X wing, X political group or wing or collective, whatever. And what are they in favor of? I.e., what should I be thinking instead of what do I think? And so when you get groups like Queers for Palestine, where they're obviously in support of a movement or a group like Hamas or the Palestinians, quote unquote, even though there's something obviously contradictory with their interests about that support, it makes sense in the sense that, we're tribalists. This is what our side is in favor of, and we're going to go with it. And it's a real kind of religion more than is a thought out conviction. I think that's how people should understand it. And that's why we get these comparisons to, chickens for KFC or turkeys for Christmas and all this kind of stuff, because it is truly people who are acting in the world with blinders on. They're just following a religious faith rather than they're following anything that they really thought through. Because if they think it through for a second, they would obviously see that their interests aren't served by that. And that if they were to hold a pride march down the streets in Gaza City or wherever, it wouldn't go ahead in the first place, but it'd be met with a lot of violence and a lot of resistance. We were looking before this. There was some post on TripAdvisor looking for gay bars in Nazareth in the West Bank. And obviously, there are none. However, there are gay bars in Israel. And that's a pretty good measuring stick about the attitudes of the various societies towards gay people and towards the freedom of gay peoples in those societies.
So one of the reasons we're talking about this today, after we've been hearing this, gays for Palestine were around long before, at least as signs in protests, long before I think all these letters were added to the acronym. But the reason we're talking about it now is because of the Eurovision contest that happened a couple of days ago. So there was the thing that I guess falls under the T. By the way, Richard, I didn't know about the plus including kind of, first of all, if I was in one of the other categories and I was put as a plus rather than, given my own letter, I'd be really offended by that. But the fact that even Palestinians are somehow there, that's interesting. But yeah, anyway, the Irish Act, which had the name thug and behave like one. Also self-identifies as non-binary. Very much. Was like her whole shtick was kind of what Ireland is nowadays, which is the anti-Israel people. And she was, behaving as you would expect. Somebody like that with that kind of attitude to behave. But also there were reports in London of gay bars, because Eurovision is popular among the gay community. Gay bars you expect on a Saturday night when Eurovision is playing to be full, for everybody to be watching Eurovision. Gay bars in London closed on Saturday because they didn't want to play the Eurovision, the Israel's song in the Eurovision. That was a thing that they're like happy to lose money, and people were cheering that. So the extent to which this is a seemingly, it looks like, if not a consensus, certainly a consensus of the loudest voices in the LGBT community. Makes you wonder, like, do people realize which side they're taking, what their life would be like in that on that side if they actually lived there? Do they realize what they're saying, or is it as as blind? Are they as blindly following as most, as students in these student protests, or most people in these pro-Hamas protests, who look like they just said, okay, is this what we're doing now? Is this what we think? Looking around to see what the right opinion is and just marching along. Marco.
Well, part of the problem is that these kind of groups are made up of very young kids, and it's a mix between youth arrogance, they're never wrong, and teenage rebellion, those kind of late teens, early 20s. And the problem is that being gay nowadays is no longer, especially in the West, is no longer cool. You're no longer special if you're gay. Nobody gives a flying crap really if you're gay or if you whatever you are. So they had to invent these new categories to award a special status. So you can say, oh, I'm special victims because I've got my special letter. So that's part of the issue. But also bear in mind that this kind of movement were never inclusive. They are very, very lefty from the very start. And that's why gay pride, you always will see loads and loads of unions, RMT and Unison, all those kind of big, properly lefty / communist kind of institution. You will see lots of placards with the socialist worker, which is the same kind of placards you see during the pro-Palestinian protests. And you also see people during gay pride with t-shirts, sporting really proudly t-shirts that say never kissed a Tory, i.e. a conservative, because they're lefties. They're effectively admitting they're lefties, and they're so lefty that inclusivity goes out of the window, and they will never even shag a Tory. You know, I'd like to see that if it happens, but never mind. So you have all these issues that actually conflate, and it looks like these guys are actually representing their community of often freaks and wackos. But it's really ultimately, again, the left that pushes the anti-Semitic agenda. And it's not a surprise that we are in the same, effectively we're talking about the same phenomenon that we've been talking for the last 6 months, where the left is effectively promoting anti-Semitism in our society.
Yeah, I think some of the reason that people are associated with the left, and the youth element of it, is obviously people coming out as what any one of those letters are tending to do it in adolescence or young adulthood. And that's the same time when they're the most politically naive, they're the most vulnerable, and they're most likely to be mopped up by the left that's going to promise them a safe zone and a safe space, or exploit them, depending on your point of view. I think I just wanted to correct what you said about the gay bars in London. Yes, certain gay bars closed for the Eurovision, not universally. And again, that speaks to the fact that it isn't one community. And there are definitely certain gay bars that are the highly political end of the spectrum, and one particular one that closed, that's well known in South London, it is exactly that, and that one is particularly well known for protests at political events or things related to elections or that kind of stuff, as well as being heavy on the drag queens and all that kind of thing. But the fact that they were willing or felt bullied in or chose to victimize themselves into closing and foregoing the business says a lot about the motivation here. Now, if you ask objectivists what the motivation between some stupidity in the world is, the answer is typically ding, altruism. And it's altruism in this case as well, I think. I think it's the fact that sacrificing yourself for the kind of people that range from wanting to hate you to wanting you dead is the ultimate selflessness. And if you also are convinced that you can later change their mind, you'll sacrifice yourself for them now, but then you'll persuade them later on this point that they're wrong about you once they've got broken free of their current oppression. Then that naivety that also goes with the youth and the left and the idealism of simple minds, that's all in it as well. It's all a big soup.
I also wonder whether the phenomenon of closing a few bars is also related to the fact that people nowadays can't be bothered to turn up to work. And I wouldn't be surprised if on a night like that, when people tend to be with their friends and watch Eurovision and have parties at their homes, it might have been the issue that lots of the staff didn't turn up or called in sick, trying just not to be at work. But one bar that I wish had closed and not shown the Eurovision was the one where I was on Saturday, when we all were on Saturday, and we had to watch the freak show unfold under our eyes. And unfortunately, I was sitting right in front of the telly, so that was particularly painful.
Thank you, Gazman and Akira, for the obligatory, not that there's anything wrong with that mention. Yes, there are still people who know that there's a Seinfeld mention for everything in life. Thank you, PC, for the super chat. PC says, makes no sense, gays for Gaza. Yes, it's not about making sense. I'm not entirely sure what it is about, but that's what we're trying to understand on this episode. And well, I don't know if we're going to get to this now, but Morgan, at some point we will get to actually an explanation about why this makes sense.
Yes, I mean, we can do that now if you like, but I think, like I said before, it resembles much more people who are part of a religion than it does people who are generally thinking through their interests. And obviously, amongst some of the people who are attending these kind of things, the question is going to come up because this kind of criticism that we're putting forward is something that's very much put to them. And although people can evade things, the thought is gonna is gonna come through in the quiet moments when they're falling asleep, and they're gonna have to try and consider it at some level. And I think probably the way that they evade it and push it out of mind uh, is probably something along the lines of the film Pride. I don't know if you guys ever, if anyone's seen that, but it came out about 10 years ago. It's a good film. And it was about a solidarity movement in the 80s around the bookshop, Gay's the Word, and a group of young kind of left-wing activists at the time who wanted to be in solidarity with the miners' strike, except the miners were quite homophobic, kind of traditional little communities. And they kind of reach out and they kind of, bridge the divide and kind of break through the homophobia in these little villages and end up becoming quite friendly. All very nice. And basically the message of the film is that if you kind of reach out and kill them with kindness, you'll bridge the gap. Right. And I'll bet the way that they rationalize it in their mind is, oh, this is just the same thing. This is just another instance of homophobia. If we just go there and nice and prideful and make contact with these people, we'll break through the homophobia. Except that's a complete evasion of the virulence of it and of the state institutionalized violence which exists in those societies. So that's my best guess as to how they evade it. But I think evasion is the key phenomenon as to how they rationalize it in their mind.
Maybe we should go to that article because that article tried to, what was the title of it again?
So it was Why Queer Solidarity with Palestine is Not Chickens for KFC.
Yeah, and as soon as you told me that title, I thought, well, that's interesting because they're actually addressing a point, and maybe this person is addressing that point in a way that hasn't been addressed. And I have to say, it's not all bad. It's mostly bad, but not all bad.
Yes, so it's an interview on them.us, not them.com, because that would be too mainstream, them.us, which is a website which says that it is the authority on all things gay today and tomorrow, all things queer today and tomorrow, all very cool. And the interview is with a professor called, I think I'm getting the pronunciation right, Syed Atshan, who is a professor who lives in the US, was born in the US, but lived a part of his life in the West Bank and is gay, authored a book called Queer Palestine and the Empire of Critique. And that book is about the kind of critique that we're making, that it's saying that there's a kind of, conspiratorial critique leveled against the Palestinian liberation movement around LGBTQ lines. And he's trying to counter that and say that that's inappropriate. And actually, most of the interview, they actually avoid addressing this, the main bit that's in the title, until right at the end. So the questioner asks, what do you say to those who argue that queer people shouldn't be in solidarity with Palestinians because homophobia is rampant in Palestinian territories? So it gets, finally to the point. And the professor answers, and I'm just going to give you the highlights. We'll link the article in description so people can read the full thing. He says, in my work, I don't deny or elide the realities of homophobia within Palestinian society and the potency of it, as well as the need to combat it and resist it. Okay, starting out pretty good. He then moves on to say, that being said, homophobia is not unique to Palestinian society. It exists in most parts of the world, including in Israeli society, as well as here in the United States. It's a near universal phenomenon, unfortunately. Now, I don't think anyone said it was unique to Palestine, but okay. He then says, it's very dangerous to pathologize Palestinian society as uniquely homophobic, or that homophobia is endemic to the society without this broader context, as well as without understanding the ways that life under brutal military occupation exacerbates homophobia within Palestinian society as well. In order for us to deal with questions of how queer people are treated in Palestine, we have to address the broader landscape of the denial of freedom to Palestinians more generally speaking. And then just to top it off, he says, I also think it's racist, in my opinion, to argue that the struggle against racism that's directed against Palestinians should somehow be halted or undermined because there's homophobia within Palestinian society. So there you go, folks. They can't help it.
Yeah. All right. So, yeah, first of all, nobody's saying it's unique to the Palestinians, but he makes the point that it's a result of the occupation. So, okay, let's leave aside why isn't Gaza, the most LGBTQIA plus friendly place since the occupation ended nearly 20 years ago, and maybe it takes longer than that. So what about Iran? Is Iran under anybody's occupation? What about all the other countries in the Middle East? Are they under occupation? Now, the thing at the end where the idea that the struggle should be halted, you're not talking about, again, every element of that is wrong, but we're not, you can say, okay, this is our cause, but you're tying that cause to being gay or being LGBT or whatever, and so you're the one tying it, and then you're saying that it shouldn't be halted. So he answers many questions that nobody is saying. He answers claims that aren't being made, and yeah, and of course gets away with it because of his audience. Um, James Valiant says, and homophobia is no worse in Gaza. Yeah. Did you get to the part where he says there's homophobia in Israel?
Yes, he says it exists in most parts of the world, including in Israeli society. And
that is true. That is true. But this is a big but. There's a difference between like the government executing you if you're gay, and like you might hear slurs or or worse, like you can be attacked or something, but that's going to be somebody attacks you for being gay, you actually they pay a heavy price, and so anyway, yeah. So everything about that, almost everything about that is wrong. And that's the sad thing is this is a little bit less wrong than everybody else because he actually tries to make an effort to explain the position. It just that he it's a very low effort.
Well, he was also, he's a gay man who lived in the West Bank. He's under no illusions, as he says at the beginning, that there is real homophobia there. And he's lived in the US. So he does know the difference. There's no question that he doesn't know the difference of what homophobia exists in the US and what homophobia exists in the Palestinian societies. And he knows the difference, that any homophobia that exists in the West is now very much out of the mainstream. You aren't going to be punished by the state. And then if the Palestinians get a state, if they succeed in their struggle for liberation, as he says, then what are they going to do with that freedom? If free Palestine becomes a reality, then a huge number of people are going to be oppressed by that, including gay Palestinians. It isn't just like the homophobia is going to be relegated to the freaks on the edge of society. It's going to be mainstream, and it's going to be governmental policy to persecute the gay people. And as you said, gay people in the West Bank or whoever are given refugee status because they have to live in hiding.
So he lived in the West Bank how long?
When he was a kid, and then for university. So he was born in the US, moved to the West Bank, apparently, according to his Wikipedia, and then went back to the US for university and has stayed there.
Okay. So he wasn't like a grown up, he wasn't a gay adult.
I presume he went back when he was 18.
Okay. Marco?
Well, frankly, when I see these kind of groups of clowns and these ridiculous people, I can tell you there is homophobia here in London. It just makes me feel like, oh God, people, you're so unbearable. But initially, when I read the article, I thought the thrust of it was actually to argue that there is no chicken in KFC chicken. But then reading it all is the guy who's trying to, as usual, blanket the whole thing. Oh, there's homophobia in Israel. Therefore, homophobia is a widespread problem. It's not peculiar to Palestine. Well, fine. I mean, go ahead, man. Go and date a jihad if you like. But if you take you for a romantic dinner on top of a building, I would be very careful if I were you. All this kind of ignoring the fact that the very place that he's talking about is trying to defend, it's not just an issue of homophobia. It's an issue of women's rights. They don't exist at all. They have to wear cloths on the heads and hide away because they're so incredibly sexist, and men are so incredibly beastly that they're gonna rape them otherwise. What they do anyway. And there's no freedom of religion. There's no freedom of press. There's nothing. There's no civilization to speak of. We're talking about places who put dead god ahead of human life. So how can you single out the issue of homophobia and ignore everything else that goes on? And how can you compare, as Morgan was saying, homophobia in the West with homophobia in these countries where you actually lose your life for it? As I read earlier on, those were all countries where you get killed by the state for having sex with somebody. And frankly, at what point we got to the stage where people have to tell you what their preference is, what sexual preferences? I don't care. Shag whoever you like. Go off with a duck if you want, but just stop rubbing it in my face. I don't care. Really, nobody cares.
I think the line in
To
that
be clear, you're not advocating for relationships with animals.
Well, if they manage to get consent, go ahead.
All right.
Has the D been added yet? Ducks. I think the line in there about pathologizing groups particularly stuck in my craw, because that's what these people do all the time. They're always pathologizing groups that they dislike, and they're always truffling around looking for offense all over the place, because that's what the intersectionality, the queer studies of universities and stuff has taught people to do, to hunt for victimhood wherever they can find it, even in words are suddenly violence, and all sorts of microaggressions become macroaggressions, equivalent to being pushed off the top of a building. And that is a question of dropping the context and dropping the degree, and just it's the irrationality of the teaching they've received at university, which is totally dispensed with reality, and tried to teach them via some fake reality created in the halls of Ivy League institutions, and down to lesser institutions across the world. For many people listening to this, many gay people, they're always being told that they are their collective. This is your group. You must accept it. You're not an individual. You are your group. And therefore, you must adhere to what the leaders or those walking in protest with placards are proclaiming is the voice of your group. And that is something that needs to be fought against, because as Ayn Rand pointed out, the biggest minority that there is, the most significant minority, is the individual. And it's the individual that is always erased from the picture in any of these discussions.
It's the smallest minority. But...
Smallest minority, sorry, yes.
If you want an example of what kind of tribalists they are, just the name of the blog itself, them and us. I mean, can you be more tribalistic than that?
I thought them meant the Jews, but anyway. Yeah, look, the thing is, we talk about this and we try to talk about it seriously, and I think we've managed to do that. But in the grand scheme of things, even a movement like Gays for Palestine or LGBTQIA plus for Palestine is a larger movement than us. Like, what we're advocating for is much more on the fringes of the marketplace of ideas. But we're working on it, and one way to help us work on it is to support us by becoming a member. And if you become a member, you get access to many members-only benefits. Most notably now is the Atlas Shrugged Book Club, which is starting tomorrow. And I believe we have both Shoshana Milgram and Lisa Van Dam confirmed for this first session, right? Which is tomorrow. Yeah. So you definitely want to be there tomorrow if you're a member, and you want to sign up if you're not a member. You can always cancel if you think it's not worth £10 a month of your money, but I think it's worth a lot more than that. Yeah, that and for that price, you can join the Zoom calls, watch the recordings. If you're a YouTube member and not a member through the website, you can watch it as a members only live stream. That is tomorrow, right after the reality show. So yeah, it's a great opportunity, especially for people who haven't read it yet, but even people who have read it, with the Fountainhead, we did 94 sessions. It took 2 years to go through the Fountainhead. This will take longer, which means we will go in depth more than anybody else. All right, back to today's topic. Thank you, Christian, for the super chat. Christian says a documentary will come out in some months about LGBT Palestinians who fled to Israel, La Belle de Gaza in French. Maybe that will help those crazy guys to see the truth. Richard, you speak French, right? So I can ask you to translate that for me. But yeah, I'm glad there is some pushback even in the world of documentaries, which is usually even more to the left than the rest of the world. Thank you, Iron Meerkat, for the super chat. Iron Meerkat says, how about we have 8 billion genders so that everyone can have protected status? Furthermore, Gaza must be destroyed. Yes. I don't know if you got actually, do we have more of the article? Otherwise, there's something else that I wanted to discuss.
That was so they only get to that right at the end of the article. So that's it, finished.
All right. So there's this news story that I saw about the Copenhagen Pride, and they organize a Pride parade every year, as all major cities announced recently, I don't know when exactly, that they demand that companies choose a side on the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. Now, they said basically something to that effect. They expressed solidarity with the Palestinians. They issued a statement. The statement was in February. They expressed solidarity with the Palestinians and concerns over sponsors' ties to Israeli companies, especially those operating in the West Bank. And as the article that I read about this says, viewing this as an ultimatum, multiple companies decided to pull out of their sponsorship. Now, this is millions of dollars that goes into this event every year, and I don't know if it's most sponsors, but many big companies that sponsor this decided to pull out because they basically were told to pick a side. Then Copenhagen Pride kind of changed their mind and said, no, we didn't say you have to exactly pick a side. We're just advocating for our views. But yeah, that's that's something generally with views mostly on the left, where they expect they expect the benefits of all the people of the work of all the people they hate and campaign against. And yeah, I'm sure many of these people are anti-capitalist as well, but happy to take money from those companies. Anyway, this backfired and is a little bit of good news, if nothing else, I think, on this topic.
Yeah, I think this is a feature of the way in which intersectionality and the like rips itself apart ultimately, because if each set of the slice of the pie is its own victimhood with its own badge of honor that is using its victimhood as a token to trade for favors from other sets of groups, and eventually it becomes ever so judgmental and critical and antagonistic towards other groups before long, and eventually it all collapses in on itself. So it's really no surprise that it ends up in an unholy mess. But yeah, it's nice to see. Well, it's reality, isn't it? It's reality giving it a good old kickback.
Yeah. Any other thoughts on this? I know I didn't actually tell you I was going to bring this up because I remembered it during the show, and yeah.
Nothing too much else on that, but just, I mean, Richard said something that I thought was a good point, which was for all the kind of solidarity that there's meant to be between the gay community in the UK or internationally, the international LGBT community, for these people to be supporting the Palestinians, i.e. the Palestinian Liberation Movement, whose representatives are the Palestinian Authority in the West Bank and Hamas, ultimately. For them to do that, the point really needs to be made to them that if you really feel like you have a loyalty to other gay people around the world or to gay people in Palestine, you're utterly betraying them. Because the real liberation for them is once these movements have been wound up and put away. Because for so long as they're there, then you can't freely or happily live your life as a gay person in Palestine. And you never will. Certainly not if they achieve their goals. And it just needs to be put to them that not only are you a fool, not only are you religious, not only are you risible, but you're a traitor to your own cause.
Yeah. And I think part of this comes out of the fact that the LGBT movement, in order to justify its existence, particularly when individual rights for gay people in Western countries are respected and there's no difference, people can marry and adopt and whatever, same as anybody else, then they have to find a new reason to exist, to collect money for charity, to exist in terms of the jobs and the cause that they're still fighting. It's a St. George and the Dragon syndrome, where after George has defeated the dragon, he spends years waving his sword at shadows all over the place because he's still, he still wants the fight, even though the dragon is long dead. So I think that's some of what's going on. I think I wanted to also consider why it is that many of the Muslims and the people with hardcore Islamic thinking, if you want to call it that, or religious beliefs, are happy to, or to what extent they're happy to walk alongside Queers for Palestine within some of these protests. Now, some of that is sheer pragmatism, of course. Some of that is just the fact that, okay, we'll let them walk with us now, and we'll deal with them later. It's the opposite of what the Queers for Palestine are thinking they're going to do. And some of it is the borrowed prestige or the borrowed authenticity of a broad church, if that's the right phrase, a broad tent, because they're able to say then, look, we've even got some Jews marching with us. We've even got some gays marching with us. Therefore, we must be on the side of right. And of course, all lefties then cheer in sheep barring unison at such a wonderful hand-holding idea. And again, it's temporary pragmatism, and it will bite everybody in the rear sooner or later.
Yeah. By the way, the Muslims were happy to see gays for Palestine. It's not all. First of all, I don't know how many of them are happy about it. Some might be quiet about it, but there are some who aren't quiet about it. And we've seen videos of people being taunted and shouted at, but they're there for I'm sure they convince themselves maybe that somehow the person shouting at them is doing it because they're oppressed because of Islamophobia maybe in the UK. But yeah, like with every movement, you have the you have the masses, which you see protesting on the street, and you have the intellectuals above, and Islam has that as well. We've seen this before, but we'll show it's relevant to watch it again. This Islamic intellectual, let's call him that, explaining things.
But there's going to be sins in protest. You're going to be sitting next to a guy who's going to go and penetrate and sodomize another guy tonight. And you're going to expect Allah to give you victory because you're standing next to a guy who's going to literally insert his genitals into another man's back passage.
Was that it? I thought there was more to it. I remembered it as a complete how-to video. Maybe that's that's part of it. All right. But yeah. And this was in reference to these protests, right? This was you're going there and you're protesting alongside these people, and what is Allah gonna say about that?
This has both a comedy side to it in the way it's presented there, obviously, but also the fact that this is in some form or another said in multiple mosques all across the country. The fact that people quote hadiths which are more explicit than the Quran even and strongly against homosexuality. The fact that when things like gay marriage or civil partnerships were being put on the political agenda here in the UK, mosques all across the country in their hundreds signed joint letters opposing it. And of course, the more sinister fact that in certain incidences, Islamic inspired individuals have attacked gay people in the UK, stabbing them, only a few years ago outside a gay bar in Clapham, murdering a few at a gay pride in Reading not so long ago, and that shows that even within the UK, where obviously it's in the mainstream, it's a decided issue. It's not a question. However, because Islam is such a backwards looking religion that is very stuck in the past and hasn't opened up in the way that other religions have eventually. And obviously I'm against all religions, but nevertheless that's the case. You see the problem here on your own shores, where Islam isn't the dominant religion, even though it's having more of an influence than ever over time. So you can only imagine, therefore, what kind of places in the world, in the Middle East, where Islam is the dominant religion, where there isn't an opportunity for people to be truly free and themselves, and therefore what a hideous world that they've created, and that these queers for Palestine, etc., are supporting in the way that they're also supporting Hamas.
And in a way, the lefty DNA of these movements comes through, because it's exactly like the anti-war pacifist movements. In the end, what you do, you just end up supporting the most vicious, the most anti-liberal, and the most brutal regimes. So you got people in favor of Russia, people who support Hamas, people who support Iran. It's like, in the name of peace. This is the most stupid thing you can do, because despite what you're saying, you then end up supporting exactly the opposite. But also, if you look up the queer for Palestine or LGBT, whatever, for Palestine, ultimately you come across literature that always talks about anti-imperialism, anti-capitalism. So it's just, to me, looking at the normal gay literature and stuff like that, pro-rights literature, and there's a stark contrast. It definitely looks like somebody else is behind the Queer for Palestine. It's just somebody trying to use their role of underdog. Look at this, poor Palestinians suffering. Do you remember when the gays were persecuted? So why don't you help the Palestinians as well? They're suffering as much as the gay used to. And so they conflate this kind of thing to get the usual idiots in the West to effectively fight the war. And these guys, not having any knowledge of any events or facts, are quite happy to be recruited for free and think they're actually supporting something that they don't realize what it is. And it turned out they're actually supporting Hamas in this particular instance.
Yeah, Feral Lunch Lady says he looked pretty excited. I also thought the guy seemed to enjoy just kind of was lost in thought there, and but yeah,
reminiscing, perhaps. Reminiscing, perhaps.
But yeah, as you mentioned, Richard, they're like in the article that Morgan read, they're talking about, we have Islamophobia in the West. Yeah, mostly from those communities, that are marching with you in these protests. And, you mentioned that it turns into actual violence, often from those communities. So it really, there's so much that you need to choose you need to choose to ignore in order to be, a gay or LGBTQ for Palestine, and more so than if you're, not. I think, and more so than if you're a straight person for Palestine, or if you're who of course I very much oppose as well, or if you're gay but don't make it a point to say, well, this is why I am taking this side. So yeah, it's a fascinating movement. I don't know if we fully understood it as we promised in the title, but we're trying. Morgan.
Yeah, we've watched that clip a couple of times now. I couldn't take my eyes off his wicked trainers that he had as well. Allah certainly gave him some cool shoes. But look, whilst these people are ridiculous, as we were saying, there is something serious underneath all this, and people, as you say, have to ignore that that is the serious attitude of an awful lot of the kind of hardcore Muslims, or even really the moderate Muslims who are going to be at those marches, and they really need to pay attention to that. There was a survey that was done by the Williams Institute that I came across in preparing for today's show. And this was done in 2021. They did a survey of 175 nations on asking them questions to gauge kind of levels of gay acceptance in those countries. And for Palestine, which I guess is they're surveying people in Gaza and the West Bank, Palestine came 130 out of 175. So not the worst and not unique as the article was saying, but very, very low down. And to put that into some context, that was below Saudi Arabia, Yemen, and the Congo. So just that's pretty bad. That's pretty low down. And all of these people have to ignore and elide those facts. As was going on in that article, there was a lot of kind of dust thrown in the air to get around the ultimate question. Yes, I acknowledge there's homophobia there, but you have to take into account all these other things that explain it. And most notably, I think what should come across from that article and in a lot of the discussion around this is the avoidance of responsibility on the Palestinians for their homophobia and the desire to just elide it completely. So in the article, it came up as you have to understand that under the brutal military occupation, that makes it worse. No explanation for how that makes it worse or how that's justifiable. Somehow they're under occupation, then suddenly they just get an urge to go out gay bashing, I guess, is the logic of it. And I agree, Marco, that when you look into this, you get into a lot of literature about imperialism. And the one that I see come up a lot is that, oh, look, the homophobia that's there is a legacy of the British Mandate because homosexuality is outlawed in Gaza under the 1936 law from the time of the British Mandate. Except if it were just the British Mandate that had imposed the kind of homophobia onto Gaza, then they would have repealed it by now. Hamas would have come in with the rainbow flags and said, hooray, we're now liberated. Except, of course, nothing like that happened. And, Britain, for all the problems with homophobia it's had, it was in, the 60s, that any kind of law resembling that one under the Mandate was repealed in Britain. And although homophobia persists beyond that, it's nowhere near comparable. So there's a huge amount of evasion about the differences between the West and Palestinian society, the levels of homophobia, and the responsibility on the Palestinians for their own homophobia, and indeed actually the ideological basis of that homophobia. Part of the reason why homophobia declines in the West is that the ideas which supported that, the religious kind of ideas, decline, and Western individualism, liberalism takes its place. And part of the reason why it isn't just kind of a fringe in Gaza that's homophobic, but it's the mainstream, is because the ideological culture, the ideological core and mainstream of that culture is homophobic, and it's drawn from their philosophical ideas. And until people acknowledge that, then we'll continue to see these evasions and, these kind of enormous mental gymnastics around this.
Yeah, definitely.
Christian says Bambi Thug is a self-declared freedom fighter. Does she actually use that? I mean, it's not that shocking. I saw somewhere that she self-identifies as a bitch. Is that, or maybe that was witch. Sorry, it was a typo. But anyway, yeah, I probably should have read a bit more about her since she was on the thumbnail yesterday, and we were, yeah, we were talking about her enough that maybe the picture and the video of her saying that she was crying was not sufficient research. But what are you gonna do? All right, in Israel they celebrate holidays or days basically start the evening before when the light goes down, and so the sun goes down, and so today is already the start. The Israel's Independence Day has started basically 56 minutes ago. So tomorrow we will be talking about that. Tomorrow's episode of the reality show is titled "Happy Nakba Day. Now, I Googled Nakba Day, and officially it's Wednesday, not tomorrow, but you know, what kind of colonialist would we be if we let the colonized tell us what day to celebrate and when? So yeah, hopefully people will join us for that. That is and of course we have many Israeli viewers, and we want to wish you all happy Independence Day, and yeah, many more to come, and of course many more angry Nakba days for the anti-Semites who want to see Israel destroyed. Any final thoughts on today's topic, Marco?
Well, it would be nice if these alphabet people decided to stop genociding our cojones and just get on with their own lives and leave the rest of us alone. If you decide to live in a theocracy where you're going to be ultimately killed because of your choices, well, go ahead. Just leave me alone.
I think some of these people are just out to be edgy and controversial, and they relish being on the fringes of society, and therefore they want a protest performance of being seen at some of these things, and they're out for their double virtue points of being both gay and for Palestine, or both one of the other categories and for Palestine, and you know, virtue is not achieved that way at all.
I would just say that the struggle for Palestinian liberation, Palestinian statehood, and so on is not a struggle for liberation or freedom or rights or justice in any respect. And not the only way, but one of the way in which you can see that is the way that they would, in the way that they do treat gay people in their territories or in their microstate in Gaza. And people really need to just pay attention to the fact that if they were to achieve statehood, it would get all just so much worse.
Akira asks, "Are you going to do a 7/7 episode this year?" I appreciate that you think we think that far ahead. We don't know what we're doing for tomorrow's TDO, but but it's a possibility, and it's definitely relevant. So the answer is maybe. But whatever we do on that day, it will be interesting, and you should tune in. Marco, Richard, where can people find more of your work?
You can find us on the Briefly Objective, the sister channel to this. If you look in the description below where it says for shorter content, it leads you straight to it, where you can see edited videos taken from this channel with visuals to go with them. They're summarizing the key issues in this war. And I believe that there probably should be one coming up for its premiere pretty soon.
Morgan?
Then you can find my Twitter and Substack linked in the description. It's Morgan Carter 98 on Twitter.
I'm Razi Ginzberg on X. Thanks everybody for joining. Of course, if you value this content, like it, comment, share, and consider becoming a member. You have exactly 24 hours to become a member. If you're not a member, in time to join the first session of the Atlas Shrugged Book Club live. That is tomorrow, right after the reality show. Thanks, guys, for joining me. Thanks, everybody, for watching. We'll see you tomorrow.